Hello and welcome everyone. It has been quite some time since I last made an update regarding the top holdings in my portfolio. And so I thought this is a good time to go over it because over the past few months there have been some major changes, especially when it comes to my top holdings. So, about a year ago, this is how my portfolio looked, with YTSL, EQCL, and GLCC representing a little over 60% of the total portfolio. And it remained this way right up until January 2026. But over the past 1 year, a number of new ETFs had been released, and around January, I felt that I could slowly move away from these holdings into more diversified ETFs, while at the same time maintaining a similar income level. So, in this video, I will go over my main reasons for selling each of these holdings, the total return I made upon closing each of these positions, as well as which new ETFs now constitute my current top holdings. So, without any further delay, let's get started. Alright, so here we have a table which shows my top three holdings and their portfolio allocation in 2025 versus where we are right now. I will start with GLCC because if you look at the portfolio allocation for that in 2025 versus now, you might notice only a 2% difference. However, the difference is much larger when you take into context the fact that GLCC had a massive bull run over the past 1 year. So, around the start of 2026, it was almost 16% of my total portfolio. So, I actually sold half of my GLCC holdings, which is how we have arrived at GLCC now being 8% of my total portfolio. The reason for this was quite simple. Given the amount of capital gains I had made on GLCC, it made sense to take profits on those unrealized capital gains and allocate that extra money to other high yielding ETFs and thus increase the overall yield of my portfolio. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that my portfolio has some exposure to gold, so I did not sell out completely from this ETF, unlike EQCL and YTSL. So let's move on to EQCL now. This ETF is one of my oldest holdings. In fact, it is one of the first covered call ETFs that I bought, and over the years it has paid me a steady income, while at the same time its capital value has grown at a good pace. The main purpose of this ETF was to give my portfolio stability, especially during bearish markets. When Hamilton came out with its Daymax series of ETFs, I found them quite attractive, especially C Day and S Day. I realized that I could achieve this objective of portfolio stability through these ETFs as well, except they are also going to give me higher income and higher potential for capital gains. So I sold EQCL and moved that money into C Day and S Day. A good chunk was also allocated to HEQL because it is just a pure growth version of EQCL, and this way I'm maintaining some exposure to international markets. In short, this change ensures that I am receiving the same level of income as I had with EQCL, but now majority of the new holdings are growth oriented while at the same time generating similar levels of income. Last but not the least, let us talk about YTSL. Just like EQCL, I had held YTSL for a little over 2 years, and during that time, it had paid me a very consistent income on a monthly basis. The main purpose of this ETF was to give an overall boost to my portfolio so that the rest of the portfolio could be invested into more safe, diversified funds, even if they were giving a lower yield. Back when YTSL was released, it was one of the few ETFs paying a high yield of over 30%. Also, at that time, my portfolio size was quite small, so having a single stock as a large position made sense. Over the years, my portfolio has grown, and along with that, the yield I'm generating from other ETFs has also increased. Not to mention, I have been reallocating existing ETFs with similar ETFs that pay a higher income, like I did with switching from EQCL to CDAY, SDAY, and HEQL, or using the capital gains from GLCC to buy other covered call ETFs. All these factors meant that I no longer needed to have a large position of my portfolio tied to just a single stock. Instead, I could reallocate this capital into more diversified funds, even if I'm receiving slightly lower income in the process. So that is just what I did. I sold YTSL and bought Utes, ENCL, Gogi, QDay, Biggie, and Misty. This new set of ETFs technically gave me a lower yield compared to YTSL alone, but at the same time, I felt it made my overall portfolio more stable. When I combine these set of ETFs with the additional income I'm receiving by switching away from GLCC and EQCL, overall my portfolio's income has gone up. So, together, all these changes, in my opinion, have made my portfolio not only more diversified, but also more growth oriented, while at the same time giving me a slightly higher income than I was receiving with the older set of ETFs. Now, let us take a look at how my portfolio's new top holdings look after all these changes were made. And here we have the new holdings. It should not come as a surprise that CDAY is my new favorite ETF and accounts for about 16% of my total portfolio. In case you're wondering why I like this ETF so much, you could take a look at my review of the CDAY ETF where I go into more details regarding the advantages it has over the other Daymax ETFs as well as covered call ETFs in general. One thing you might notice among the updated holdings is that, other than CDAY, no other ETF has 10% or higher allocation. This is on purpose. Apart from being diversified in terms of holdings within the ETF, I also wanted to make sure that I'm diversified in terms of the covered call strategy being employed in the ETF. For example, Evolve writes their covered calls on each individual company within the ETF, whereas GlobalX writes their covered calls on the entire index. Similarly, CDAY uses a combination of higher dividend paying stocks and 0 days to expiry options, whereas HDIV is a fund of funds which holds covered call ETFs as well as a growth oriented ETF. The older set of holdings lacked this form of diversity. Another thing you might notice is that I have listed 8 holdings on the right hand side, whereas only 3 holdings on the left hand side. This is because under the new setup, the top 3 holdings only account for about 30% of the total portfolio. So, to make it equal in terms of the total percentage of the portfolio being compared, I had to include the additional 5 holdings, which bring the total to over 60% of the total portfolio, which is approximately the same allocation as the top 3 holdings in the old setup. All right, let us now take a look at the most exciting part, which is the total returns I got after closing these positions. I will start with the ETF with the lowest total return and move towards the one with the highest. In terms of duration, these total returns are for a period of little over 2 years. So, starting somewhere around November or December 2023, all the way up to January 2026. So, starting our list, we have EQCL, which had a total return of 24.42%. My average buy price for this ETF was $22.13, whereas my average sell price was $23.90. So I did end up making a capital gain by the time I closed this position, although the vast majority of its returns came from the income it had paid out during the time I held it. If I had to divide the total return in terms of income and capital gains, then 16.42% of the total return came from the income paid out, and 8% came from the capital gains. Over approximately 2 years, the total return of 24.42% translate into an year-over-year return of 11.5%, which is not bad in absolute terms, but it could have been better when we look at its non-covered call counterpart, HEQL. Hence, I'm hoping that the ETFs that I swapped in after selling EQCL, which are CDAY, SDAY, and HEQL, should give me a better overall total return moving forward. Now we move on to YTSL. Over the past 2 years, this ETF was the primary income driver of my portfolio. And when I closed this position, I ended up with a total return of 53.26%. That is a year over year return of 23.8%. My average buy price for this ETF was $23.74, and my average sell price was $26.24. As mentioned earlier in the video, this ETF was sold around December 2025 when it was trading in the $25 to $28 range. Given the fact that it was around 28% of my total portfolio, it was nice to have that extra capital gain when I closed this position. However, I must add that I held this ETF during a very steep decline phase when it went as low as $15 per unit around March 2025. Out of the 53.26% total return, 42.73% was through the income paid out by the ETF over the 2 years, and 10.73% is capital gains. Overall, I still think it is a great ETF and a perfect buy for anyone who likes the underlying holding Tesla and is looking for an income oriented investment. Last but not the least, we take a look at GLCC. The partial position which I closed gave me a total return of 166.57%, which is a year over year return of 63.3%. The fact that this ETF ended up being the best performer among the three is quite surprising. Back in 2024, when I was buying this ETF, gold had only moved sideways over the past decade. So I was not really buying this as an investment that would give me a high return, but rather as a defensive position to shield my overall portfolio against market downturns. But ironically, an ETF that was meant to be a defensive position ended up being the most aggressive performer. My average buy price for this ETF was $21.73, and the average sell price was $53.18. So, with this ETF, I was able to cash out a substantial capital gain. In fact, out of the total return, only 21.84% comes from the income paid out. The remaining 144.73% is capital gains. I had made a video back in November 2023 explaining why I found GLCC as an attractive investment. Back then, GlobalX was known as Horizons, so it is quite an old video, but most of the stuff explained at the time remains true even now as far as gold is concerned. Hence, I only sold off half of my GLCC position and I am holding on to the other half. Gold or gold miners is a good defensive position to have at around 8 to 10% of the total portfolio. I still think gold might go up further over the coming years, even though it has had a good run over the past couple of years. And in case it goes down, it will simply be an opportunity for me to buy back the shares I sold at a cheaper price. And with that, we conclude the short update of the top positions in my portfolio. Let me know in the comments which ETFs represent the top positions in your portfolio. As always, do your own due diligence before making any investment decisions. The information presented in this video is based on my research, contains my opinions, and does not count as investment advice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you found some value in this video. Thanks for watching. I will see you all in the next one.